Alwin, sorry, let me just interrupt you for a second to tell you that we are live. So everything you are saying is being streamed.
And actually, as a chair, I should interrupt you all now because it's 5 o'clock. So let's just start with it. So welcome everyone. Sorry, Andrzej, do you want to?
No, please go ahead. I will share in due course.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the final session of CPP, which is on AI and machine learning. So we're going to have 2 talks, 10 minutes each and 5 minutes for questions. Please either ask your questions live or post them on CloudR. I will pick them from there. And without any further ado, our first talk is a formal proof of Park learnability for decision Stumps by Joseph Tessarotti and a number of co-authors. Please.
Hello, my name is Jean-Baptiste Tristan from Boston College, and I am presenting the paper, A Formal Proof of Pack Learnability for Decision Stumps. This is work done in collaboration with Joseph Tessarotti from Boston College, Kundinya Vajja from the University of Pittsburgh, and Anindya Banerjee from IMDEA. Our motivation is to better understand what we can prove formally about machine learning algorithms. When we think about a compiler, we know that we might want to expect a compiler to produce efficient code, or for example, that we might require the compiler to preserve the semantics of the input program. But the question that we want to ask is, what should we prove about a machine learning algorithm? Of course, there are very important properties that other people have been looking at, such as privacy, fairness, or robustness. But what we want to understand here is, are there more fundamental properties about the learning process itself, properties about learning that we could prove about a machine learning algorithm in a proof assistant? To that end, we need to understand a little bit of learning theory. And we need to understand the model of
Andrzej, sorry, I had to mute you since we were hearing you, but now we cannot hear the video anymore. Andrzej? Well, maybe
anything, something goes wrong, right?
Well, you were still unmuted, so we could still hear you. So I had to mute you, but then it also muted the video. So can you resume and do it so that we hear you not via your speakers, but via the right way?
Sorry about that. But please, you should also mute me now.
Well, no, you have to mute yourself, because it seems that if I mute you, it mutes really everything.
It's just that I no longer have control on this thing after I start sharing. So let me.
Maybe go a few minutes back.
Algorithm in a proof assistant.
Okay.
To that end, we need to understand a little bit of learning theory. And we need to understand the model of supervised learning. We assume that there is a labeling function tau going from some domain x to 0, 1 and a distribution over x, mu. We don't know what they are, and the goal is to devise a learning algorithm or learner, which is going to take a training set, which are data points sampled from mu and labeled by tau, and a hypothesis space, which is a subset of all of the functions, all of the classification functions going from x to 0, 1. And a learner is, when we train it, chooses one of these hypotheses. Once we have such a hypothesis, we can deploy it and we can actually do classification. And if you have a new data point x, you can classify it as 0 or 1. Of course, what we would like to do is to provide some guarantee about the generalization error of such a chosen hypothesis. We would like to be able to say that based on our choice of hypothesis and based on our training set, we have some expectation that our hypothesis will behave as tau, the labeling function, the true labeling function. One of the key problems that we have is the so-called bias variance trade-off, where if we pick h too small, then it might not contain tau, or it might in fact only contain hypotheses that are really different from tau. It's a case of underfitting or bias. But we cannot choose h to be too large either, because in that case it might require a lot of training example to do a good job at choosing a hypothesis, and this is the problem of overfitting invariance. This is the type of things that we would like to prove about our learning algorithm. We would like to prove that there is a relationship between the training set size and the hypothesis class. Pack learnability and the framework of pack learning allows us to do this. I'm only going to give an informal definition of pack learning, and you can actually find a formal definition in the paper or in the long version of the video. We say that a hypothesis class H is probably approximately correctly learnable, or pack learnable, if intuitively there is an algorithm. You can actually exhibit an algorithm A, which is such that for any accuracy epsilon that you might want to choose and any confidence delta that you might want to choose, if you have a training set that is big enough, then with probability at least 1 minus delta over the choice of the training set S, the hypothesis that is chosen by A, or another way to put this, the hypothesis that is returned by our algorithm A given some training set S, has an error, a generalization error of less than epsilon, right? Which is a measure, this generalization error, of how we differ from tau, the target function. Of course, again, all of this is formalized it's present formally in the paper. In this paper, indeed, we actually present a formal proof of pack learnability. We do this for one specific class, hypothesis class, and one specific learning problem, which is the problem of learning decision stumps. We do this using the lean proof assistant, and among other things, some of the questions that drove this work were: what is the ratio of algorithmic reasoning to what I would qualify as the mathematics annoyance? That is, how much of the development is really about proving properties about the algorithm, as opposed to just proving properties about measurability of functions, events, and so on. Also, we want to better understand to what extent can we actually develop such a proof, such a formal proof, by separating the reasoning about the high-level reasoning that we find in the textbook from all of these mathematical details. The problem that we address in this paper, decision stumps, is fairly simple. In that problem, the domain is the real line, and the target function tau can simply be associated with a point on the real line, such that any value less than tau is a blue circle, anything bigger is a red cross. The first question is, what set of hypotheses should we consider? We could consider any function from R to 0, 1, or to a blue circle and red cross. But here we'll just simply consider the set of all of the functions which are such that which are given by some value on the real line, and which will classify anything as blue circle if they're less than that, and red cross if they're more than that. And so we identified our hypothesis class as simply being R, all of the points on R. An algorithm then, to show that this hypothesis class is pack learnable, could simply be the algorithm that returns the largest blue circle. Our proof is organized in 4 different parts. One part of the proof has to do with the algorithm implementation. It's only 20 lines, and I think it's fair to say that it is trivial. And the algorithm is deterministic, but its input is random, and so for that reason we actually use the jury monad to specify the algorithm in the lean proof assistant. We have to prove the algorithm properties, which is about 150 lines, which is also fairly trivial and in a sense correspond to proving that the algorithm indeed returns the rightmost blue point. Finally, all of the measurability analysis results that would usually not appear in a textbook proof correspond to Naharian lines, and they are actually more difficult. Some of them are really non-trivial, and that includes proving that the algorithm is a measurable function, that the events are measurable sets, but also proving that some of the things that are glossed over in proofs, such as the fact that there exist some specific points on the real line, actually hold. And finally, the final part of the development is the probabilistic statement and the high-level reasoning. It's about 500 lines of proof, and it's basically routine probabilistic reasoning that correspond very closely to what you would find in a textbook proof. And to a large extent, this amounts to proving that the algorithmic properties lead to the set properties over events, which themselves lead to some probabilistic properties. So, aside from giving a better idea of what are the different parts of the proof and where most of the difficulty lies, where unfortunately much of the difficulty lies in the mathematics details that we do not actually, that we gloss over on a paper proof. The modularity is so that we were able to define the algorithm and its properties in isolation from all of the measurability and analytic results. The probabilistic reasoning and the statement are actually built on these two things, on the algorithm definition properties and on the measurability and analytic results. And of course, the proof depends heavily on the algorithm definition, but we can actually have enough automation so that the measurability details do not actually encumber the probabilistic reasoning. In conclusion, you can find all the details about this proof in the paper. There is also a documented proof on my GitHub repository. And finally, I should say that working with Lean was a very positive experience, in large part because MathLib is a very nice project and actually gave us all of the results that we needed to do our proof. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hello, any questions, please? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me. Right, good. Yeah. Are there any questions? And let me very quickly also check Cloudar.
Yeah, people also raise their hands. So I see how you can also see people raising their hands in the system.
Can't see anything on Cloudar, so maybe just raising hand or just speaking would be all right.
Yeah, Arthur, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Jean-Baptiste. It's good to hear about this work. I'm curious. Can you say a few words about how you explain you will use the same approach to other learning algorithm or other case studies? I'm not even sure I understand the implication of how much of the kind of learning algorithms can be covered by this technique.
Hello, that's a good question. Actually, I would say that the next step would not to verify other do verification for other models or other classes of hypothesis, but rather the next step would be to prove the general theorem that covers a lot of different hypothesis classes, which is the fundamental theorem of machine learning. And if you were to do so, then it would basically cover many of the most common machine learning models, but again, that's only a qualitative proof. It wouldn't actually give you a concrete bound.
And how ambitious would that be? Is this something you can do next year, or much more ambitious than this, you think?
I think it's more ambitious than this. I think it's doable. The fundamental theorem of machine learning, its proof on paper is several pages. It involves a little bit of combinatorics. It would also require working with function spaces. So at a high level, it seems to me that in Lean, it would be doable, but yeah, some work's involved. And I think Joe might actually know more because he's thought about this much more precisely. But I would say it seems to me to be the next big milestone, I guess, for that line of research. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, I think doing the sort of the proof style that you see in informal textbooks would be doable, but they kind of skirt some of analytic things, or would leave those up to axioms and don't describe the details. I think if you were willing to similarly admit axioms about some of those analytic details, then you could replicate the proof in textbooks. But if you wanted a complete proof, I think it would be pretty ambitious.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? I just want to say it was brilliant talk. I had a look at both the long version and short version, so I definitely recommend everyone to check the long version as well. It's very nice.
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So your line count says, well, a huge part was essentially spent on proving measurability goals and the like. Now, is that due to a lack of proof automation, or are these really intricate results that we don't have any chance of automating them?
A large part of it, I think, is lack of proof automation. Several of the proofs of measurability of functions in particular, they're very routine, and it's actually very easy to think about how a system could actually basically just look at the structure of the definition of a function and generate the right proof. However, in general, proving that events are measurable can be a little more difficult, although I can still see how automation should be doable. But we did actually have two cases where actually it's not clear to me how the automation would work. And these two cases did represent a fair number of lines and were somewhat difficult. So yes, we should be able to automate a lot, but at least from my perspective, by having looked at this proof specifically, there would still be a few things that would require some work, either with measure theory or real analysis.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. We should go to the next talk. Let's thank the current speaker. Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. All right. So, Kundinya, you're ready? You're here?
Yeah, I'm ready.
The next talk is by Kundinya Vajja, who's presenting it live, and that's on formalizing convergence proofs of value and policy iteration and COC.
All right. Thank you, and thanks for everyone for joining. This will be a short talk on CertRL, which is a library of results containing a formal proof of convergence of value and policy iteration in COC. This is joint work with Avi Shenar, Barry Traeger, Vasily Peshsun, and Nathan Fulton, all from IBM Research. In an overview, CertRL contains a COC formalization of Markov decision processes, long-term values, optimal value functions, and Bellman operators. It also contains a formal proof of convergence of value and policy iteration, in the case of stationary policies, and a finite time analog where we compute the optimal value function for a finite sequence of time steps, and proof that the finite time optimal value function satisfies the Bellman equation. This was a lot of words, but in this talk, I will only explain the formalization techniques and design decisions that we made, and the details can be found in the long talk and also in the preprint. Okay, so this is a typical reinforcement learning scenario. We have an agent, which is the turtle, and the environment, which is the environment surrounding the turtle. The turtle is in a particular state, which can be represented by a position in this grid. And in each state, it can perform certain actions, move up, down, left, or right. And as soon as it performs an action, the environment transfers the agent to a new state and rewards it. and the loop continues. The goal is to find a policy or which is a mapping from each state to each action with time, so that the agent's long-term reward is maximized. Long-term reward is simply the weighted average of each of the rewards which the turtle, with the environment rewards the turtle at each time step. Okay, the transitions are stochastic. I didn't mention this before. So that means that if the turtle at a particular state performs a certain action A, then the next state can only be specified up to a certain probability. The primary correctness property which we are interested in proving about these reinforcement learning algorithms is convergence. We want to know that in the limit, these reinforcement learning algorithms should converge to a policy that optimizes for the long-term value. So value and policy iteration are two such canonical reinforcement learning algorithms. You hear about them in Machine Learning 101. And their convergence proofs are also typical of convergence proofs for reinforcement learning algorithms in general. And they depend on the theory of Markov decision processes and the Banach fixed point theorem. And it is in these two areas that we utilize two techniques for our formalization. We use the GD monad for capturing the transition structure of a Markov decision process. And we use the metric co-induction proof rule, which is a restatement of the classical Banach fixed point theorem for reasoning about fixed points of contractive operators. Okay, let me take both of these in turn. So the GD monad. As I said, in reinforcement learning algorithm, we are generally interested in the behavior of an agent n steps from the present. But I also said that the transitions of an agent are stochastic. So we need to have a way of composing probabilities. Now, classically, this was done by a state transition matrix. We have a state transition matrix. We take its powers, and that matrix is used to compute the probability that the agent visits a particular state n steps from the present. However, dealing with matrices by themselves in a proof assistant can become tedious, and because it is at the wrong level of abstraction. And so we did away with matrices by using the GD monad. And the key idea which makes this possible is that the Kleisli composition of the GD monad recovers the Chapman-Kolmogorov formula. Okay, what does this mean? The GD monad is, so if A is a type and P of we let P of A stand for the type of all discrete probability measures on that type. And to this space, we can assign two operators, the ret and the bind, such that P, bind, and ret form a monad. Now, if we consider Kleisli arrows of this monad, F and G, then Kleisli composition puts these two together to give a composite arrow from A to P of C, which is the domain of A and the codomain of G. And if we expand out the definition of this and you simplify, you get this expression in equation 3. Now, if you look at just the summand of equation 3, that is fxb multiplied with gbc, you will see that it's a probability of starting out at x, ending up at c by visiting a particular intermediate state b. Now, if I sum over all possible intermediate states, then I get the total probability of starting out at x and ending up at c. Now, this is exactly the classical Chapman-Kolmogorov formula. So we have recovered this simply from the definition of the GD monad. How do we use this in our formalization? Well, for any Markov decision process, you can ask the transition structure induced by a particular policy. And so if we start out at an initial state S0, and if we want to recover the transition structure at k steps, we simply Kleisli iterate one instance or one decision rule, or the Kleisli arrow induced by one decision rule k times to get the entire probability transition structure after k steps. And this helps us avoid matrices and matrix multiplication entirely. Okay, so the second design decision was metric co-induction. I said that value iteration, the convergence proof of value iteration depends on the Banach fixed point theorem. And so this is what the Banach fixed point theorem says. I read this as if phi is a closed, non-empty subset of a complete metric space X, which is preserved by a contraction f, then the fixed point of f is also part of the subset. And stated this way, the Banach fixed point theorem is called Dexter-Cosen's metric co-induction proof rule. It is co-induction because it's equivalent to the statement that a certain category is final a certain coalgebra is final in a category of coalgebras, but the details are relevant here. Why do we state it this way? Well, we state it this way because the proof rule helps streamline and simplify proofs about theorems of streams and stochastic processes. Typically, in certain scenarios, we want to show that a certain the limit satisfies a certain property, and when we want to prove that, we have to rely on epsilon delta arguments. But now, with the help of this proof rule, we can infer that the property holds of the limit as soon as it holds initially, and so our proofs are now neater, and we have reasoning at a higher level of abstraction. In our formalization, we use a form of metric co-induction called contraction co-induction, which was so named by the paper of Fays, Hansen, and Moss. I won't go through this, but I want to give you an example of our Coq formalization of an English proof here. So on the left-hand side, you see the English proof of a certain statement, and on the right-hand side, you see the Coq formalization of the same thing. And I've highlighted areas which correspond for the formal and informal equivalents. So if I go through that, you will see that the proofs almost are at the exact same, are of the same length, and they're also of the same level of abstraction. And so this goes to show that using this proof rule, certain proofs can become simplified and formalization can be really pleasant. Okay, so on this slide, I have another proof, a textbook proof of the policy improvement theorem. Again, the details are irrelevant, but the textbook from which this proof was taken proves this certain property that A is less than or equal to B, and it does so for every partial sum, and then expands out and proves that the property also holds of the limit, which is V pi prime. If we are formalizing such a proof using contraction co-induction, we don't need to do all of this because the proof was already done once the hard work was already done in the proof of the fixed point theorem once. We don't have to repeat it again. So concluding, we have proved convergence of classical value and policy iteration algorithms in Coq. The formalization is available here. We've also computed the optimal value functions for any finite horizon MDP. Using for possibly non-stationary policies. We've used the GD monad and contraction co-induction to streamline and simplify proofs. And for future work, we are looking at formalizing convergence proofs of model-free reinforcement learning algorithms such as Q-learning. Thank you for your attention. And I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. That was a great talk.
Yeah.
Questions, please. I've just checked Cloudar, nothing there. Audience, please. It's very pleasing to see how contraction co-induction is applied here so practically. So that's very nice. Very, very well done.
Thank you.
In either short version or long version, you mentioned that this is part of a formal ML project,
right.
And the final goal of the project is program synthesis.
Right. Yeah.
Could you expand a little bit on both? I'm curious.
Well, I'm not the right person to do that. Unfortunately, I was an intern for the project, and that the project aimed at doing formalization related to synthesis work. And this was the formalization part. The synthesis work is still upcoming, so I can't really comment on that. Okay. Sorry about that. I can take it offline after after talking to my co-authors. Yeah.
Okay, that would be interesting. But in the context of this formalization, what do you even define program synthesis? Would it be formalizing getting an MDP out of a type, or?
As I said, I'm not too sure. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Right. We'll not press here.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone else? Okay. I'm curious about one other thing.
Yes.
Again, you mentioned at the start that this may be used for verification, that reinforcement learning is now used in critical scenarios, safety critical scenarios. Do you want to say a little bit where you see this could be applied?
Well, we see implementations of reinforcement learning in a lot of safety critical scenarios, I don't know, like self-driving cars, things like that, right?
Yeah.
And most of those implementations take convergence for granted. So this is a step forward in reducing the trusted code base for those implementations. That's how I look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not proving safe against attacks or anything like this.
That we've considered that to be future work. So we introduced the safety angle pretty conveniently because our formalizations is a bit modular. So I'm pretty sure that could be future work. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next one. Final chance for question, please. Okay, I'll definitely follow up about program synthesis on Cloud R.
Okay.
I think that's an intriguing part. So I'm passing the chair role back to you, Andrei or Katalin, because that's the end of the session. But I believe there is another session, which is CPP community meeting.
All right, many thanks to the speakers and to Katya. Okay, so this concludes the CPP meeting, and I think things looked quite well. The presentations were very interesting and lively. So now we are going to have the PC chair report. Maybe we take a 5-minute break, so to speak, and we'll continue with the PC chair report in 5 minutes.
And then can you start sharing and I'll like point at that button? It's big.
Katalin, it's for me at least very difficult to understand you.
Oh, connection problems?
Where are you talking from?
Same place all the time.
Sounds like some microphone problem, actually.
Okay. Is it better now?
No.
So the only problem is that I'm the host. Should I make someone else the host and rejoin? Leonard?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can make me or Leonard host.
But I didn't know you were around. I cannot see. And did you figure out how to start the presentation? I made Leonard host. Can you hear me better now? Or
No, doesn't make a difference.
So
better now?
Say something again.
Well, I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better now.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened.
By the way, do you want us to stream the PC meeting live too?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, no, that's fine. Just people, yeah, should be aware it's still streamed and recorded.
All right. So I can start sharing but somebody has to tell me how I present the Google slides.
Yeah, that seems fine.
Okay, my only problem is that I cannot see how I get into presentation mode.
You hit the menu completely, I guess. Can you hit Control F5 then? There is a menu usually, but
Okay,
yeah, okay.
I'm there.
And there is a big present button on the right.
Oh, it was just too big. This is why I missed it. All right. So can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, welcome to the chair's report. Let me start by thanking everybody for participation and for making this edition a success in spite of all the problems and in spite of this highly undesirable situation. I think we're able to make the best of it. Let me start with some statistics. This shows the submitted papers and accepted papers over the last years. This year we had 54 papers submitted and 24 accepted. This was the third best number of submissions, on par with Paris 2017, but less than in the previous year. This may be due to the fact, the difference from the previous year, it is very hard to consider due to several factors. The situation has been quite different this year from really any other years in the history of humankind. But one thing that we did allow for an extra month of reviewing, which meant that the authors had to submit in September, on the 22nd of September, as opposed to 1 month later in October. Okay, so we had, as I said, 54 submissions. These were, there was a light double-blind reviewing, and we used, just like in the previous year, we used HotCrap, which is very nice and customizable. And we accepted 24 papers for an acceptance rate of 44.4%. Based on our best judgment and on the content of the reviews, we can say that the submissions were really high quality, even better than the acceptance rate may suggest. And I guess this may be due to the fact that we have this great filter of quality, which is the availability of formalization, the actual formalization that is performed and associated to a reported result. As I said, there was plenty of time for reviewing. We learned from our previous experience that it might be a good idea to offer more time for review. So there were 62 days for reviews, in addition to the for reviewing and discussion, in addition to the 7 days for bidding. And one thing that was new this year is that we had a really big PC. There were 35 PC members in addition to the 2 chairs. This was 35% larger than last year. This was partly because we wanted to ensure an acceptable load. And something that I would say is in the tradition of of CPP, and this year was represented even more prominent. We had, out of the 35 PC members, 27 had never served in the CPP before, so they're members of our community. Some of them quite young, some of them actually in a more advanced stage of their career, but they had not served before in the CPP committee. So we had quite a few fresh people joining us. And unlike in the previous year, because of the large PC, there was a smaller need to appeal to external reviewers. So we had fewer external reviewers than actual PC members. Okay, so what we can do at this stage is a big thank to all the PC members. And I'm going to attempt an applaud in the tradition of today's.
Andre, there is a little button in the bottom right. You can play.
Oh, exactly. Thank you, Katalin. We have actually a more professional applause here.
Just click on the.
Okay, thank you all very much to all the PC members. I hope this did not destroy the audience's ears. And we'd also like to thank what happened? To the PC members, right? Actually, so be prepared, because I'm going to play the applauses for the PC members as well. What you heard before were the applauses for the external reviewers. Okay, so a big thank to our PC members who have done an amazing job, and to our external reviewers whose reviews had an equally high quality. And of course, last but not least, we want to thank the POPL organizers who were very communicative and really, again, operating under really harsh circumstances, have made this event possible. We were really running this conference, as in the previous years, on their facilities. But this time, there were, of course, these big challenges of having everything online. And of course, we would like to thank the CPP Steering Committee for their support and advice. Okay, so now I would like to hand over to Leonard. Leonard, do you prefer to present from your own computer, or you use my presentation?
You can just keep sharing yours. Yeah, another big thank you is due to is in place for our sponsors. We had quite a lot of sponsors this year. Katalin started this process last year, and I took over a little bit of that organization this year, but Katalin was really helping a lot with that already. He had already a lot of contacts, and I think it's both for the conference very good to have this support to demonstrate the relevance of our area in several areas. So you see here some several blockchain companies, but also more other companies, hardware companies, system verification companies, and the like. So thank you very much. If you haven't gone to their sponsor rooms yet on Clouder, please do so. Some of them even have special events still and presentations later today. Many of them will be around even after CPP ends. Some are even also sponsors of POPL main conference. Also follow the links on the web page of CPP to these companies, and they are keen to talk to you. So thank you very much. I don't have an applause button here on this page, but maybe we can just applaud this way. All right, and now it's over to Katalin.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Andre. So maybe my part is the more open-ended part that's supposed to lead to a big discussion. So I should mention that you can jump in at any time and we can discuss. Of course, everything is public and on the internet, so don't say anything too controversial. But before I start, I wanted to reiterate the context of all this with this picture, which, well, kind of sums it a bit all up. In a way, the POPL organizers had an extremely difficult task this year. Also, 3 events, one Annabelle Satin leaving as a conference manager, and she was really the one running POPL each year, and the other SIG plan conferences, and still no replacement at this point. Then COVID-19 a few months later, and changing to a fully online conference. And if you want, the biggest wave you are feeling now is the Clouder pre-release the day before CPP after a complete rewrite. So all these things made their life very hard, I would say. And CPP as a POPL affiliated event, well, is just tagging along on their organization. And if you have feedback about the general organization that POPL provided, well, there will be a POPL business meeting in 2 days, and also a forum where you can give feedback. So I don't think there's much use talking about that here. I would say that at least the missing conference manager and the Clouder issues will be fixed by the next edition. Hopefully COVID-19 will also be fixed by the next edition, but I guess that's anyone's guess. And there is another challenge on the right side of the screen, climate change, which I don't think will be fixed, and might mean that virtual conferences or having at least some online aspect to conferences will become more and more important as we take this more and more serious. So with this context in mind, well, I'm going to continue discussing about the rest, right? About the part that CPP had control over and the kind of changes we've made in this edition. One is having multiple chairs. So we moved to this junior chair, senior chair model for program chairs, where each chair serves 2 consecutive years, so that it's much easier to pass knowledge from one year to the other. I think it's working very well in that I could work together with Andre, and if Andre wants to say something about the experience, you can jump in.
So all I can say is that you, Katalin, you've taken your role very seriously as a senior chair, and I think it helped a lot. So the only way in which I can thank you is to be as good as senior chair next year as you were this year. So it's really appreciated.
I think that's exactly the idea. So I guess that's exactly the expectations of you taking this over next year. Then, since this year we have a separate conference chair, this year Leonard, who takes care of CPP specific organization. In particular, this means finding financial supporters, well, taking care of them afterwards, and then using their donations. I think both the separation and the junior chair, senior chair model worked great, and we will continue doing it. And next year we are getting a second separate conference chair to work together with Leonard, and the second PC chair to work together with Andre. Today it was a bit of a bootstrap year in which I was still having both positions. And in a way, maybe I should mention, like, the idea of this separation, we've discussed it in also last year's chair's report, is to kind of build a bit of a wall between the scientific part of the conference, say how papers are accepted, have it more explicitly separated from, the sponsor finding an interaction process, and with organization and more generally. And of course, sure, I can always wear different hats, but I think it's even better separated when there are different people taking care of them. This also offloads people. And it also helped a lot with really physically running the conference with streaming videos. And I don't think one single person would have managed to even run the conference, say, on Zoom under the current constraints. Physically, we kind of needed 2-3 people. Another thing this year, Andrei mentioned it in detail, 1 extra month of reviewing. We also made this decision, of course, in the steering committee after discussions last year. One piece of data that played a big role was some data that Amin gathered from both us, so CPP and Popl, and doing an intersection between the submitted papers. And well, we could figure out that the intersection was tiny, 2.78%, so basically 2 papers. 2 CPP submissions were Popl submissions. And in fact, if I remember right, they were both rejected as CPP2. So in a way, going for that extremely tight schedule was completely unnecessary. So that was the reason why we gave ourselves 2 months instead of 1 for reviewing the papers, which led to a much more decent schedule, a lot less stress for the reviewers, and hopefully higher quality reviews. We could also do 2 rounds of reviewing. So in the end, I don't see any disadvantage to this. So we propose to continue this new submission deadline in future years in September. Another new thing this year are the Distinguished Paper Awards. Around 10% of accepted papers at CPP are designated as distinguished papers. The designation says what this should mean. In practice, these are papers with very high scores during the reviews, and then they pass through an additional, let's say, selection process by a committee formed of PC members. And this year's winner are these 3 papers: Formalizing the Ring with Vectors, Machine Check Semantic Session Typing, and a minimalistic verified bootstrap compiler. I think it's very good work, and it's good that if our community can recognize its best work. And also, I think it's good for the people winning these awards, especially when they're in early stages of their career, if their work can be appreciated also in this way. So the feedback was also positive. It's also things that the steering committee has already approved, so we'll keep doing it. Now, something less formal, but also important. We've decided to introduce an amazing reviewer award. We didn't want to call it best reviewer award since we didn't really know. I mean, in the end, it's very hard to compare. But we would also like to acknowledge the work of reviewers and the work of reviewers that put particular care in giving good feedback and helpful reviews. And this year we are awarding this to Catherine Stark, who's in fact served on the PCs of the last, also of the last CPP, has always provided great feedback and helpful reviews and very detailed reviews. So if you've got such a review from CPP, then it's very likely you now know who your reviewer was. No, I'm kidding, but many reviews.
Yeah. We actually have, yeah. There were many good and detailed reviews, yeah.
So I'm not sure whether Catherine is on the call.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, thanks.
I cannot see everyone, but yes. Thank you for the great reviews. Okay, now I have to figure out how to continue with the presentation, sorry. Is it still working? Okay. Okay, I managed to go to the next slide, sorry. Well, on the more open-ended side of the discussion, one thing we wanted to ask you is about the conference format. I mean, nobody knows whether next year we'll have to some extent the same procedure as this year. So the question in the end is going to be how much we want to keep the same format next year. It was the POPL organizers' idea after looking at previous SIGPlan online conferences. It was opt-in in a way. If we wanted to do something else, we could have done it. But in the end, it seemed sensible and we went for it. So, I mean, I guess you've already seen it, like 3 half days at the intersection of US and Europe time, long talks on YouTube for asynchronous consumption, 10-minute talks, plus 5 minutes for questions. And then what we've attempted was 10 to 15 minutes of private breakout rooms. This was the part that I think didn't really work. Like it led either to empty breakout rooms or to breakout rooms only with the authors. I'm not aware of big discussions happening or even more people being in those rooms. So yeah, today we even kind of more by accident gave up on it. We forgot to create them and eventually no one complained and everything seemed to work fine. So so in a way, yeah, the problem solved itself. But the question is more for the rest, maybe up to fine tuning, right? I'm not talking about fine tuning, for instance, starting 1 hour earlier so that we kind of advantage Europe people a bit more over US people, because it was getting pretty late for a majority of participants, I would say. I think it's Europeans. But I think anyway, these are tiny details. Well, the question is, okay, I will tell you the question precisely, and make it a poll on, but I'm not sure how I'm going to choices using the button. Okay, it seems I'll be able to set the choices. So I guess yes and no. So I've created the poll on Clouder. This way we tried that feature too. So the question is, did you like the current conference format? Should CPP be fully online again? Should we do something similar? So I think this is an important question, since it could inform, yeah, what happens next year should CPP be online again. So yeah, you have a few seconds to enter your answer.
So Katalin, maybe you want to explain how to find the poll on Clouder.
In the CPP meeting room. Well, we have 10 answers out of quite more people. I cannot, since this interface changed, it's 30 participants. So yes. I mean, I don't know. Are the numbers still updating, or do people see 7 for yes and 3 for no, or do people see different numbers? Because I got the results as soon as I voted, but I'm not sure whether those are still.
I'm not seeing any results. So I
don't see
clicked
any
one
numbers
of the
either.
options,
Maybe
but
it's
there's no results yet.
Yeah, me neither. I was wondering if I miss it, but yeah.
Okay. So I can close the poll. I mean, if people are no longer voting, I can close the poll. And I guess people will see results. Okay. So the numbers were much different than what I was seeing. So I saw the numbers when, when I had voted. Well, so it seems it's a pretty clear majority for yes, but I would still like to hear from the no people what they would prefer, because
Also,
I think that would be interesting to hear.
Just that as feedback on Clouder, it's still not updated on my side. So I'm not sure if it's supposed to be updated automatically or if I have to refresh to see the results. But
well, I don't know. I can put the results in a new slide. It's just copy paste. I don't think you.
I mean, I saw them on your screen, so that's fine. Just as
okay. So
as feedback for Clouder. I don't know who to tell, but.
Well, I'm not sure if we are supposed to see the results, right? People who maybe just the organizer.
Well, I don't know. It seems awkward, but I can copy it in. I can copy it. I've copied it on on Clouder too. Well, anyway, so I think what would be more important would be to hear from the people saying no, what format they would prefer, so that at least we know, yeah, what alternatives would be in a way when, say, having a discussion on this in 1 year's time if the situation arises.
So if you are a no person, you didn't know what you are getting into. Now you have to justify.
Exactly. So Andreas raised hands. So
yeah, just one comment. So something that I found very difficult this year was actually grabbing the people once their talk is over. I had no idea how to find where they are currently in Clouder. Maybe that's my inability to use Clouder. Maybe it's because people just have disappeared after their talk. So yeah, the social interaction was much better than at the conferences that I was at last year, but it's still far away from the conferences that were held physically where everyone was present. The other thing, I would really be curious how many people actually watch the long talks on YouTube. I mean, YouTube gives us counters for that. It would be interesting to see maybe in a week's time or so, what are the numbers that we get there? Is it even worth the effort of preparing the long talk? Or could we just have a longer conference format saying, okay, the talks run from 9 in the morning Europe time until midnight Europe time, which would then be longer than the US time, longer than the European normal time. So maybe I can't watch every talk, but at least there's more room for discussion, more room for going into details, more room for individual people, because honestly, those half-hour coffee breaks everyone is just happy to rush off. Get a break, get something to drink, get a snack. People are not around.
Okay, so I'm creating at least one more poll, which is how many talks have you watched before how many long talks have you watched before the conference?
Although admittedly, this is not the entire story, right? Because the long talks are forever. There is value in uploading.
Yeah, sure. But still, there is, in a way, one could also just make them available after the conference, while we ask the people to make this available in advance. How many did I watch?
Oh, now I'm actually seeing the live updates.
Yeah, I've chose a different option.
Maybe while we're voting, I also voted no in the first poll. And I want to agree with Andreas' first point. So I think for a year where there is no possibility for a physical conference, this was close to perfect, nearing. So it was very, very good. For a year where we can have a physical conference, and that's why I voted no, I don't think a virtual conference is a good idea. And that was not specified in the question. That was not specified in the question. Yeah.
Just to say that was a conditional. Maybe the question should have been phrased a bit clearer. So that's a conditional. The first should is an if, really.
Good. I did not get the conditional.
I think you're right. I mean, it's really, we are really used to live conferences, so this is a really hard discussion, and it's more about climate change.
I messed up. I
really prefer
messed up the
people really
options though, because I didn't give the 0 option. Sorry, I think I should have also had 0 as an option for how many long talks did you watch? Sorry. But okay.
But there is a variation to this question, whether virtual or not, and namely that is, if once we have in-person conferences again, how many people or how attractive it will still be to have virtual conferences at the same time. And my suspicion is for many people, not only because of climate change, but because of many issues, it would be good to have both kind of ways to participate in a conference, but it may also be another factor that makes organizing the conference much more difficult. And probably we will again sort of follow the Popple model and piggyback on whatever they propose, unless people here have already strong opinion one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't know. Also, we are getting pretty low signal, low number of respondents. So I'm not sure whether the people who didn't respond the second poll, well, had 0 as the answer. but I should have asked. But in a way, I would say with 10 people, maybe it's not worth having more polls. But yeah, I think at least qualitative kind of data is still useful. I mean, for me personally, both for climate change reasons and travel reasons, it would be interesting to have at least hybrid conferences when it's possible to, when it's already possible to travel. And it doesn't seem a huge amount of effort over, you know, having Clouder working and stuff like that. We were already live streaming talks in previous years. And all these other goodies like having longer versions available asynchronously and stuff like that seem generally useful, not just for physical or virtual conferences.
Exactly, and there is another side to this, right? When you prepare, well, I guess for the shorter talks, having the videos made available. So when you prepare a recording, you also better prepare for a live talk. So this is also something that counts.
Yeah, so
but more generally, people want to, I think people want to share their work, and we were actually quite impressed that everybody was on time with providing the long version and of the talk, which was quite a while. It was required quite a while before the time of the conference. So it was really nice to have it.
Yeah, by the way, the interface is pretty terrible, and I have troubles seeing people raising hands or whatnot, so I think you should just pick
Martin, you raised your hand for something?
Yes,
Martin? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to agree on the idea of having on the long term a hybrid model. I'm especially thinking of the situation when a conference is happening on another continent. So if I had the choice, I would prefer to take the train and go to the conference in person if possible, but I would prefer to avoid flying on another continent, even when the pandemic is going to be over. So I see on personal level a lot of value in there for environmental reasons, and I also know of a lot of people who have a family and for whom it is also difficult to take multiple days to fly on the other side of the world to attend a conference.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Martin. Absolutely. And I can confess, a personal confession, that I was a pioneer of this hybrid model by missing my flight. Well, it was more a visa problem, missing my flight to Australia for I think it was actually a CPP, and I presented 2 conferences online. So, and this hybrid model worked quite well.
Yeah, I think in a way, remote participation is the easier sell in terms of conference organization and whatnot. I think like also having it also for the authors, I guess it might be a less easy sell, but I think we should try to, the people who prefer this way, I think should be pushing conferences going forward. Say when the CPP first call for papers come out, that hey, I cannot come, and you need to accommodate it.
As a counter argument, I think the remote participation is much easier in a fully online conference than in a hybrid model. Like if you have a hybrid model, you run the risk of having like a first class and second class participants, and that they kind of get left out at the social activities and such.
Well,
by doing it completely online, at least, I mean.
And also the schedule may be more for the in-person people, so there will be longer days likely because.
Yes. So I think that's, I mean, the hybrid model, it also has disadvantages.
Difficult, yeah.
Yeah, I guess so, but I guess it will be hard to convince one camp or the other for the foreseeable future, or for the next few years at least.
Maybe one point that has been addressed a little bit at the beginning would be the length of the talk themselves. So I don't know what the general opinion here is, but I personally think that 10 minutes was very short, both as a presenter to present my ideas, but also as a listener. For some of the talks that I found very interesting, I had the impression that 10 minutes was not enough of the subject. And I will go back to some of the talks to watch the 30 minutes version later on. But as Andreas said earlier, it also impedes the discussion after a talk because it had a lot of them had to be rushed so much.
So Martin, if I understand correctly, so the problem is not so much in having access to the longer version, which you can read in advance, and of course you can ask questions about the longer version as well, but rather having more time for discussion. Is this correct?
I would say both. So I think that more time for discussion would be very beneficial, but I also think to have more than 10 minutes talks would be beneficial. So I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning was to choose 10 minutes over, let's say, 15 or 20.
Timing? Like...
Yeah, so my theory was because of the time zone differences.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if there could be some compromise there to get a little bit more time for both the talk and the discussion.
Well,
So
the compromise was that we ran CPP for 3 days. But yeah, in a way, with the current format, it was hard to. It would have been hard to have longer talks. The question is, though, yeah, like, why wasn't it enough that you could watch the 25 minutes versions in advance? Is it just habituation, like people are just used to only come to the conference with their hands in their pocket, or or were they not made available in time, or were there other issues which we might be able to solve? Like, say, if you say they weren't made available in time, we could maybe make them available earlier, or things like this.
So I understood it this way, that the 10-minute talks was the high-level presentation, and then based on that, I was expecting to then go back to watch the 30 minutes talk. So I think I understood the whole concept wrong there.
I have to say this is also how I would prefer it, that you have short talks that make you want, that acts like abstracts and make you want to check the longer video instead of having to choose among the longer videos, not at random, but it's more difficult to know which one you allocate your time to.
But if it's really like an abstract, then it should be even shorter. Then it should be like 5 minutes, like at the main Popple conference, and then it should be clear that it's not like it's not the full talk, but you should watch the long version. It's really just an abstract.
Well, okay, I'm not sure. So in a way, if, for instance, would people have been happier if the talks were 5 minutes, and if we would have made them available earlier, like Popple did? Popple made them available before us, even if they're starting after us, okay, by a few days and in both directions. But in a way, they also made available the 5 minutes version from the start, not just 1 day in advance. Would that be a better model? So that people really do have some time, at least a week, to watch the long versions?
Well, to me, it's a big question of what is the actual point of the conference then, right? So, because if we can all consume all material asynchronously, why do we meet? Well, we meet in order to discuss things.
Yeah.
And then the question is, why do we even need a short abstract pitch in the plenary sessions, basically? Couldn't we just expect that people have watched the talks beforehand? Then we would get away with maybe maybe a single day of 4 or 5 hours, where people can then split up into groups and find their discussions. Because currently the problem, in my understanding, is, well, with a 10-minute talk, that's supposed to make me interested. Well, if I then go and watch in the evening, well, probably not in the evening because I'm tired of all the talks, but maybe the next day or soon thereafter, and then I want to talk with the person that did that research because I noticed something interesting in the talk. Then that's important to actually have access to that person. So in that respect, we could rethink our conference strategy of saying, well, everyone is expected to have informed themselves on the topics that they're interested in. Of course, that introduces some sort of selection bias, because I only watch the topics that I'm interested in, and I probably wouldn't have watched something that I'm not familiar with, but I might pick up actually something very interesting. So this is something I like very much with the longer talk format. If there's an uninteresting talk, there's no problem that I can zoom out and, I don't know, read a few emails, sort things out, whatever. And then I can enter midway into the talk and realize, oh, they're actually doing something cool. And that's something I will miss because I won't take the time to watch all the long recordings, which have a considerable overlap with the short versions.
Yeah. But so one thing to add here is that I think part of the problem was already inherent also when we had live conferences, and it's now maybe becomes more clear, which is that, I mean, I really don't have the mental bandwidth to process 15 or 20 talks in one day. Like that's just, I mean, maybe some people can do it, but I guess most people can't. And so if you ask people to watch those, I mean, these videos in advance, then you will always get a selection. You will choose a few of those that you find most interesting. So, and I'm not even sure if that's a bad thing, because as I said, that's already, if you're at a live conference, well, you are maybe watching the talks, but then you're not paying attention with all of them anyway. So.
Yeah, so I guess the current format is trying to kind of.
I think so. I mean, I think having the long talks available also for afterwards is a good thing. And then, yeah, the main thing to focus on is maybe, allowing the discussions to be spread more over the conference, because it's still a bit hard now to find. I mean, there's one moment, like 5-minute slot, where we have a discussion about each paper, but that's very short, and would be interesting to have like a way to, or a possibility to make, I'm not sure what's the best way to do that.
Although I have a question here.
I think I was first. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So 2 points maybe, both to Andreas and Jesper. I think it's really trying to find a balance between depth and breadth, right? I mean, at the conference, indeed, you also go to find about cool new things that you might not have. Indeed, they're not in your area, and just being there in the room, well, allows you to, well, pick up things that you wouldn't pick up otherwise. And I guess these are the 10 minutes this time, and we could try to make it, I don't know, if we turn them into 15 minutes, and then I think, well, I think we had 15 minutes or 17 minutes maybe last year. So for instance, one idea to reach that could be to start earlier, say, during the day, and we might be able to, and have slightly longer days, and we might be able to accommodate, say, 15 minutes talk. Then another idea, okay, did I miss it? Related to the discussions, I guess, well, we are all experimenting, so I don't think we know what would work best. But maybe one idea could be that we tried this thing with the breakout rooms and didn't work very well. Because I guess in part because they were in parallel with the next talk, and people didn't really want to get out of the room to have a discussion right away. So we should really do what conferences do and have the discussion right after the session, right? Maybe we could say, well, the speakers of the session should go to their respective cloud rooms right after the session. And then you would know for sure that you would find the authors there and you could talk to them. How about that?
That would be indeed much better. For example, I had my talk today at the beginning of my session, and the sessions are grouped by topics. And of course, the talks I was most interested in were the 2 talks following my own talk. And I was a bit worried, now I will have to go into my breakout room. Well, this didn't happen, so I could watch the others, but so if I had to go to a breakout room, I would have felt it was a pity that I could not be there for the other 2 talks.
I guess the thinking was also a bit that you could have watched the other two talks.
Yes, I watched them in advance just for that reason.
Right. So I guess that was a bit the thinking. And I guess the thinking was also that, well, the discussion would probably not take more than 10 minutes. So
yes,
in a way,
but then you risk missing the discussions about the other papers.
Well, the hope was that in most cases you would have returned before the next Q&A, but of course, one can never
I understand.
But well, I guess in a way, maybe indeed the more natural model would be that we have, we tell authors to be in there, to be kind of, we require them to stay in their breakout rooms after the session ends. And I think this could be a good idea. Another thing I've seen at other conferences, which I don't know, it seemed pretty interesting, would be to have a joint kind of breakout session after the talks for all the talks.
And that's what
I don't know. I guess that's less useful. I find that questionable.
Well, to an extent, that was what dynamically happened in some of the breaks just in the main CPP room, right? People stayed around a little bit longer and started talking about things, and sometimes with questions about the talks. So it's similar to the traditional format.
Yeah, but I guess in a way,
this was the after session.
The problem with online, I mean, in a way, this is what happens at the physical conference, right? But at the physical conference, you can have as many little discussion as you want, while virtually, well, if there is a room with 50 people,
but
there's most one speaks at a time, and that's, I think that's the big problem. So I think I would be for really just having separate, like everyone goes to his Clouder room, every author goes to his Clouder room, and the participants know that they can reliably find them there for extra discussion.
But let me ask something concerning the availability of the authors, because this is interesting. Did people, without giving names, of course, did people have experience with trying to reach out for an author for discussing more details about their work and not being able to? Because I would imagine that the authors are very interested. I mean, what's important is that we provide the facilities, the rooms where they can meet. But at the same time, I would imagine that the authors it's in their best interest to be available. This doesn't necessarily have to be enforced. So were there any negative experience in the sense that, so Andreas, you mentioned, for example, it was not easy to reach the authors immediately after their talk, but probably.
So I could have gone to the breakout room, but I also wanted to watch the next talk. So I thought, I'm going to try and grab them later, as I would do in a conference. I remember their face, and I'll run across their way at some point in time. But honestly, I have no clue how to find a person on Clouder.
So, but I think in that situation, what you could have done is go to the page on Clouder of that paper and then ask some text question there, and it even has some connection with the video chat as well. So if you would get you could ask, well, when are you available? Just on the page of the paper.
True.
I'm not sure if all the authors are watching the page of their paper, but in theory, that should be the case.
Yeah, I think in a way, I guess we are all new to this thing. I mean, we also got access to Clouder one day before it shipped, right? Like everyone else. And in a way, I guess people are still having troubles finding their way in a way, and also kind of building up expectations of, how much you should be available and where and at what time, right? And I think if we are more explicit about these expectations, that yes, authors are supposed to man their papers page and answer the questions there and set meetings with whoever wants to talk to them, and also be physically there in the break right after their talk, I guess it would be a bit better, right?
Yeah, that's a nice summary.
If I may add something, the discussion is just not one-on-one. So when questions are asked after the talk, this is beneficial for all the participants. Maybe would it be possible to kind of increase a little bit the discussion time after each paper, maybe from 5 to 10 minutes?
Well, I guess it's a bit tricky in different ways, right? So one, I guess it would have to be at the expense of less of shorter talks, right? And no one, I don't think, on this call wants that. At least I haven't seen anyone lobbying for 5 minutes talks. And the other thing is, what was the other thing? Well, for some of the talks, there weren't that many people asking questions. I mean, it was usually the session chairs who got the chance to read the papers or look at them more carefully. So if you have 10 minutes and then you don't have questions, what do you do then? Does the session chair have to ask questions for 10 minutes? I don't think that would be realistic in a way. So in a way, 5 minutes was already a decent thing, also at physical conferences before. I didn't have the impression that it was very frequently, maybe other than the invited talks, where there were really many questions left to answer. And then I would say, well, use the breakout, use the break after the talk to have, let's say, a smaller group of people who can chat about and ask questions.
Yeah, I think this absence, well, not absence, but scarcity of communication after the talks doesn't necessarily have something to do with the model, but also with, I don't know, with everyday life of people these days. People are really stressed and so on. So we have to factor this in as well. It's basically people have not allocated necessarily time for going to the conference. So they just give their talk and then they get back to work. So this is also something to factor in.
Well, but I think if we made expectations clearer from the author side, for like tell authors what's kind of kosher and what's not kosher to do, I think people would follow those, most people, unless they would be under big constraints, and then it's also understandable. So I think it's really a problem of, well, it's new for everyone, so no one really knows what to do.
I think that's a good conclusion.
Okay, so if there is nothing urgent, let me finish with my slides. I just have 2 left. Which one was it? Well, I guess I can do the whole screen, although I keep getting random stuff, so now I think my computer is on the brink of crashing. So yeah, other novelties we had this edition were the lightning talks, which I think were great. Were one of the few sessions where all the talks were live, or most of the talks were live, and it was interesting, recent work, and it was just one session, so you could quickly get to know many things that are happening. The other thing was the virtual dinner. Sadly, it was only 25, 30 people around. It's hard to tell out of how many, right? We had 380 people who checked the CPP box a few days before the conference.
I think this was okay for a dinner without food provided, right?
Yeah, well, I would hope that people come to these dinners not just because of the food. Well, anyway, the more realistic number of participants, which is what we've seen in the rooms during the sessions, is something between 30 and 110. still it's a low percentage. And I guess, well, mostly because people don't know how these things work, because the feedback I've got for the people who actually participated was very positive. Like almost everyone said they were pleasantly surprised by how well you can communicate in these small hangout rooms of 4 people. So
it sometimes felt like an actual dinner table discussion. Yeah.
So yeah, I think if you guys spread the word and do attend these dinners, well, maybe next year more people will attend, if it's again in this kind of virtual setting. And then last thing, an idea, well, we had, but Andre is very excited about it, so he will tell you more.
Yeah, well, I know this is a quasi-controversial topic. So yeah, there is this question on whether we should officialize the artifact evaluation component. So we basically require the authors to attach artifacts, so add this as an official part of the call for papers, not only as a desirable part, but as a mandatory part, where it applies and where it is possible, of course. And also ask the PC members and the reviewers to be more thorough. And of course, POPL has this artifact evaluation that is done in a separate committee, and it's really a separate process, but probably we do not have the resources or the time to do this. So, but at the same time, if something passes the test, the evaluation test, if this is, let's say the formalization is evaluated by an expert, maybe we can actually have a badge, something like the POPL certification badge, with the fact that really what has been reported in this paper, let's say, has been formalized or has been implemented. So I know that over the years, so in my experience as a PC member at CPP, I know that different chairs have different views about this, about really chasing the submissions really carefully. This is a bit of pressure added on the PC members, but at least in my opinion, I think it helps improve the quality of the overall work. So
maybe I can also jump in and in a way say that even naturally in the last 2 years at least, which is the ones I know, I mean, most of the submissions come with high quality artifacts, and the reviewers look at them during the review process. In a way, I would say this is better than what POPL and the SIGPlan conferences are already doing by having an optional, only a badge kind of evaluation of the artifacts.
And it should be better, because this is about formalization, yes.
Yeah, and I think it would be only a small delta to strengthen a word somewhere in the call for papers, which I think is already pretty strong, strongly suggesting to the authors that they have to provide their formalizations and things. So as to move into a world in which, well, they have to provide a justification if they cannot somehow, I don't know, they work in a company, they cannot really release the artifact. But really, they would have to provide a reason, and it would have to be a good reason for not providing an artifact with the paper. And in a way, all this information would be passed to the reviewers, who could assess whether that's reasonable, and maybe the paper still makes sense without an artifact. Maybe it's a proof on paper, whatever, some CPP.
Okay, in this case, it's absolutely
don't have artifacts, but in a way, the delta with respect to what we do now is surprisingly small. I think
there is a delta. There is
I
a
guess
delta.
the other part of the delta would be making it clear to reviewers that, well, they should also look at the artifacts.
Exactly. So I guess the general question, the general spirit of this question is whether, so I'm not sure if people have opinions on this, whether we should make mandatory for the submission and the review process, the making sure that what is being reported in the paper, let's say, is backed by the formalized results, and that the formalized results are complete, or if there is anything missing, any missing pieces, like sorries in Isabel or admits in Coq, they should be clearly reported in the submission at the submission time.
May I step in? So what you just say about maybe there is some sorry or admit or stuff like that, that raises a question. So as an author, so that was my first submission as to such a conference. I wasn't sure what form the artifacts should have and how to structure it. So I wasn't sure how to best present that. So maybe it could be an idea could be to give instructions on what the reviewers, what they would like, or how we could help them to understand our artifacts as easily as possible. It could be just hints on how to structure the formalization so that the important parts are highlighted and the boring artifacts and the boring stuff are abstracted away, put somewhere else. Maybe try to help the reviewers by forcing us to provide good artifacts.
Yeah. I mean, I've run the POPL artifact evaluation for 2 years before running CPP, and some of the people with whom I run it, I know Benjamin Delaware was in the room at some point. If he's around, he can also confirm. Like, we put quite a bit of work in documenting the process so as to help submitters of artifacts. So if you go on the POPL page, I think some of that is still around. So in a way, we could even reuse it. No, I don't think it's so different. And I also know of other efforts, at least 2 other efforts, focused specifically at kind of mechanized proofs artifacts, where people have kind of tried to explain how you should document and how you should, what you should do and what you shouldn't do when submitting a proof artifact, right? So there's definitely this documentation that we could make part of the call for papers in this case, right? If the whole thing is more official.
Do you mean some kind of appendix to the paper? So describing the artifact? I'm not sure I understand what you mean there.
Well, yeah. So there is a certain amount of, I guess the documentation would be part of the artifact, not part of the paper. But we would give you hints on what kind of documentation would be useful to provide.
Okay, Ben?
And I see Benjamin, so.
Yeah, so I'll just chime in. You know, I think as a community, like I served on the POPL at AEC with Catalin and then after him, the year after him. I think as a community, we have a pretty good sense of what sort of guidelines, good guidelines for proof artifacts look like. You know, we've been doing this for 4 years. That's fairly spelled out. And in fact, there have been multiple efforts that spell out sort of different requirements for proof artifacts, but they're all basically the same. So I think we've got a pretty good handle on, as a community, what we expect from a proof artifact. My one concern here would be the additional burden on reviewers and or standardizing what our expectations for reviewers are with regards to artifacts. Like, how does the artifact get integrated in their review? Like, what are our expectations? You know, maybe there are some admitteds. Is that going to be grounds for rejection, right?
No.
How do we, you know, these are concerns I'm just raising. And on top of that, if you know, that's going to add additional burden on the reviewer when they're evaluating the paper. So you might need a bigger PC. These are just, I don't know, stuff to consider before you dive in. Because the artifact evaluation committees, typically we have 3 artifacts per reviewer, and they have 2 to 3 weeks to do it. So I mean, this is not a non-zero amount of time. So we need to
well, the good
answer
news
these questions.
CPP, the good news for CPP is that we, at least this year, the review burden was around, I guess, 4 or 5 papers per PC member for 2 months, if I remember right. we never really calculated.
Sounds about right.
Which, well, it's not popular, right? I would be very worried to do such a change for popular, where artifacts usually play, at least formalizations play usually a less major role than at CPP, where fewer papers have formalizations, and where reviewers get 20 papers to review over a summer, right? Well, reviewers will get 5 papers in 2 months.
Yeah, I think that point's fair. I just want to reiterate the point. Like, I think it would be helpful for reviewers if we could standardize how the artifacts are integrated into the review process, right? Because at least with POPL and I mean all these other artifact evaluation committees, the decisions are really sort of distinct from the decisions on artifacts are distinct from decisions on papers, and it would,
Yeah. So I totally agree with you, Ben. The trade-off here is really in terms of putting pressure on the PC members, and also I agree that there's a main difference from conferences like POPL, where the artifact evaluation is different from the paper assessment. Here we have many of papers, or most of the papers, are reporting on a formalization. So it's not an issue of let's say policing admits or sorries in the formalization, but it's a notion of essentially providing evidence for what you are claiming in the paper. And this does require some artifact evaluation process, even though they should be integrated organically with the process of evaluating the paper. And yes, it is a bit more work. I mean, I guess overall, it is a bit more work per PC member. Depends, of course, on the number of submissions. But it's when this happens, it is basically the case that only one of the PC members that is assigned to a paper, perhaps one that has expertise in that particular proof assistant or tool, will actually will take this, will put this effort. So, yeah, maybe in practice it would not turn out to be so much. And also, just to say, so this is not necessarily a fresh new proposal. This is something that at CPP has gone up and down depending on the personal vision of the chairs so far. But yeah, so it's more like not a fresh new proposal, but to see what people think about this. So, and yeah, so Ben, I much appreciate your
maybe it should also be discussed again with the steering committee.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, on balance, I think this is a good idea. I think this is the right direction for CPP, but there are trade-offs.
Yeah, so actually this was the end of the prepared part of this discussion. And now it's the unprepared part of this discussion, where you can throw tomatoes at Clowder or whatever.
But there was a lot of, yeah, there were some major unprepared components as well.
We already had a good discussion. So yeah, is there anything else that the remaining 14 people want to get a fight? Raise and
I wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for the also the plenary talks that you selected that were both amazing. So you did a great choice. It was really super interesting. Thanks.
Okay. That's a compliment to the PC. Jesper, you also raised your hand, or was that?
No,
no? Okay.
Or by accident.
Okay.
But yeah, also,
okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I just gonna say, well, yeah, also, yeah, thanks for organizing, and it was a very pleasant edition of CPP. I mean, despite the circumstances. Yeah.
How did it feel being on the program committee, Jesper? I guess that might also be useful feedback.
I mean, I think that everything was organized quite smoothly. It was the first time I was on the PC. So yeah, I think like you said, the quality of the papers that were submitted was really high, and had good discussions and such. And the load wasn't too high compared to like, main POPL or ICFP. So yeah, it was very nice. Yeah.
Cool. Sophie?
Yes, I may have a more orthogonal and maybe controversial issue. I was not really happy with having to put the video on YouTube. I did it because I understand that right now it's complicated to have an alternative solution for archival of the videos that is stable in time, but still the licenses are not very nice. So you can choose between giving full control of your video to Google or to the whole world. Yeah, it would be great if alternatives were developed.
Yeah, I don't know whether Clouder people are looking into this and how POPL in general dealt with this. Is there any person who had a POPL paper here this year?
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
An alternative may be to host it on something like Clouder and only make it available to conference attendees rather than the whole world. But that would tend to harm people 2 or 3 years down the road, new graduate students who weren't registered.
I'm not talking about the availability of the video, it's nice that everyone can access them. I'm talking about the license that you can put on the video, who it belongs to, and what people are allowed to do with it.
And
because
to add to that,
sorry.
To add to that, we also should think about whether we actually want to put all of this in the hands of Google. Like, do we know that they will actually keep it online or not in 4 years?
Exactly.
Okay.
It would be better to have control over that ourselves.
And there are alternatives like PeerTube that could be, but it's complicated right now. That if you have a server and you can run a PeerTube instance, and then I don't know, maybe some companies can provide the guarantee that they will leave the videos online for some time. But this would require money, so.
Well, I think that Clouder already provides this. I think the only reason we didn't get to it is that, well, we are doing Zoom and stuff as an affiliated event this year, while POPL gets the great opportunity to try all the features of Clouder, including its video processing and whatnot. So I think Clouder next year will provide also the video sharing part. And I've just tried. The videos of POPL are not on YouTube; they are on Clouder. So I think this will solve the problem. There is still the problem of streaming, but I don't know. One has to die one day. If we find a better platform that supports streaming and integration with whatever we will be using next year, well, Clouder, I guess.
The streaming, I think for me at least personally, I think it's less of a problem because it's anyway only for, this moment. But the recordings, the
streams are also,
yes.
No, the streams are actually
important
also
that stay available in some reasonable format.
Yeah, they're also available. Well, I don't know. We can see. I guess this will be for Lennart and Andre to see, depending on what Clouder provides, what Clouder integrates with, and stuff like that. I guess those will be the main forcing functions.
Okay. Yeah, I've taken a note. Anything else, or shall we conclude this session and let people in Europe, I don't know, spend the rest of the evening elsewhere?
Get dinner, finally.
Or go to Copenhagen and see Fritz, have fun with Fritz.
Yeah, at some point, one idea was to run local sub-conferences This was happening in September or August, when the COVID situation was still pretty okay, but travel was not yet up to speed, and I think I wasn't very much into this, but at least Fritz was very much into having a kind of local gathering to kind of watch Popple together. Say in a university, I don't know, or in a group, watch Popple with your students, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. At least it could be a middle ground in this.
People are free to do that next year when they can travel and get around, but I don't think there's much that in terms of organization. I mean, we could have a board, virtual, where people can announce that, but
you can have big screens where you show Popple and you have people cheering and so.
Popcorn. Popple corn. Well, we'll see. I mean, in a way, we'll see what will happen. I mean, what form conferences will take after all this thing. And I guess it's going to be some sort of hybrid, but I don't think anyone knows what exactly it will be. So the discussion is still on.
But I think you're right that after people get the online part, get a good grasp of it, the hybrid ones are not going to be that bad. So currently people are afraid of, I mean, organizers mostly are afraid of hybrid conferences. I heard many organizers really freak out when they hear the word hybrid. But this is because they don't yet master the online buttons. Once you have them, hybrid would be natural, I think.
Let's hope so.
all right, maybe that's a good point at which we can thank everybody for their feedback.
Stop recording.
Yeah, stop recording, stop streaming, and I think many of you
then take the real
feedback tomorrow and Popple. And otherwise, we hope to see you next year.
Stop streaming, Andrei.
Oh, I'm the host?
I don't know.